primary Canadian military journal, and they were hypothetically academic articles, and I read them. And so Mark, you listed a variety of problems with the Canadian military, and none of the problems you listed are the problems that the new Chief of Defence Staff is planning to, what would you say, address. The fundamental problem that she seems to be wanting to address is sexual misconduct in the military. Okay, now, so here's the problem I have with that from a diagnostic perspective. The first issue is, I'm sure there are instances of sexual misconduct in the Canadian military, but I'm not sure at all that there are more of those in the Canadian military than there are in the typical university, for example. And so, in fact, my suspicions are that there would be substantively less. And the reason I think that is because I know perfectly well that the Canadian military tilts towards the recruitment of highly conscientious people, and they're less likely to do those sorts of things. So I'm sure there's plenty of it because we're putting young men and young women together in very stressful circumstances, and they're going to misbehave. And that'll also be true of some of the people who aren't, mere recruits. But that's not the issue. The issue is it more prevalent in the Canadian military, and is that the crisis? And then the next issue is, let's say there is a problem. And then it isn't clear to me that there is, but let's say there is. Well, what's the solution? Well, the other thing I ran across in reviewing these papers is the solution is the same damn DEI solution that's being applied to everything. And so I don't see this as a diagnosis of what's wrong with the Canadian military. What I see it is an extension of the fundamentally leftist, radical, postmodern, neo-Marxist presuppositions that are destabilizing all our institutions, being focused on, removing the patriarchy from the military, which I can't imagine a more woolly-headed or ill-advised diagnosis and solution than that, especially given all these other practical problems that you've described. So let's delve into that a little bit. So I don't know where to start with that.
So I could just start by saying, I think that with Jenny, or General Carignan, that was the job she's coming from. That was created, the Chief Culture and Personal Conduct that was being revamped. And that command was created to address, I think, the sexual misconduct things that were coming out of that. So it is my hope that she disbands that as her first job as the CDS, and I will happily go on record as saying that. So
you think there's any chance of that?
I don't know. Because
just to stop you for a minute, your initial premise was wrong, I think.
Okay.
When you said she's going in there to promote that as CDS, as Chief of Defence Staff, I'm sure she knows as well as all of us that her job is to be the Chief of Defence Staff, to command the armed forces, to make them operational.
Yeah. But that had been her job that she came from. You're absolutely correct. That was created. So, but it's this radical progressive agenda, and it's been imposed right on every facet of Canadian life. And academics, some embraced it as academic, like the law did. But to impose it on the Canadian forces, I shake my head. If the warrior culture, we have to stamp it out. Oh my God, if there's one place you want to have a warrior culture, wouldn't it be in your Canadian forces? Wouldn't it be in your military? Like seriously. Right. Anyway, so dealing with the sexual misconduct. So when it first came on, and I'm going to say, without hesitation, there are predators in every organization. And predators, they should be rooted out, prosecuted, and given the boot. Absolutely. Is every man that wore a uniform, or even the majority? I never encountered it. So as I said, I joined in the early 80s. Women were allowed in the military police for just a couple of years. I was often the only woman in the truck, in the tent, on the truck, whatever, and it didn't happen to me. Were there jerks? Absolutely. And there were women jerks that I worked with later too. But it just didn't happen. And so what bothers me the most is when I hear this is not that it happened, but first of all, they say that it happened and that nobody did anything about it and they had nowhere to turn. That I have a real hard time with, because I can tell you that if a bunch of times when an inappropriate remark was made to me, I don't know, about how I looked at my uniform or whatever, as I took that remark in and I thought about it, before I had a chance to respond, the guy next to me said, "Hey buddy, that's not cool."
Right.
And that happened all the time. And that didn't happen just with Canadians, that happened with our allies. And I was very lucky to work with a lot of our allies. And it just wasn't, if you have no experience with the military and you read the legacy media and you see it, you wouldn't want your child anywhere near that organization because it's this, misogynist, toxic. Yeah.
Well, and you see that now. We all have friends who, either their kids or as we get older, maybe grandkids are considering the military.
Yeah, they're scared.
And you get this question, it's in our circle is,
you in the Catholic Church.
Well, it's like, would you really?
Yeah.
Is it safe?
Yeah.
And it's gut-wrenching, to hear the question. Yeah. You can intellectualize the question, and then you have to, as Barb is saying.
Oh, that's also got to be radically demoralizing, especially for the good people who aren't involved in this sort of thing.
That's, so we look at what's happened. So, we're going to root them out. And what have we got so far? We've got 3 senior officers that I'm thinking off the top of my head gentlemen who were they found guilty? No, they weren't. But the careers of Art McDonald, Danny Fortin, Steve Whalen are over,
and their families
and their family circumstances. And what happened? Some historic weird event when everybody was drunk on a boat and there's no witnesses. But these men, they're done. And I think
well, drunk on a boat is also relevant. So I studied antisocial behavior in relationship to alcoholism for like 15 years. And so one fact that you can lay on the table instantly is that if there was no drunk people, there would be virtually no sexual assault.
Agreed.
So if you were actually serious about sexual assault on university campuses or in the military, the first thing you would focus in isn't culture and it isn't personality. It probably isn't even the predators. It's probably alcohol.
So we addressed this like a long time ago. Like, I've been out for a long time, but I remember we had, it was called SHARP, Sexual Harassment and racism prevention. And these courses were in the early 80s. And so it's not like this was, we haven't done anything about it. We've been going with the times since then and changing our culture. And alcohol was a big part of the military culture in those days. Yeah. And that's changed. That started changing even with the younger, when fitness became a thing kind of, and it stopped being like, but I can remember going to the mess and you had to drink whatever. And that changed. So we have moved with the times, but it
doesn't mean these problems don't exist.
Yeah, of course.
But as you said, to Barb's point, how much of an emphasis and amplification do we want to put on the existence of those problems?
Well, we might want to first of all demonstrate that they're real. And the way you do that is by a comparative analysis, and I don't see any evidence of that. So the problem of sexual misconduct is real. The problem of alcohol-fueled sexual misconduct is real. Is that particularly typical of the armed forces in Canada? I doubt it. You'd need overwhelming proof before you made that your primary concern. Now, on the alcohol side, too, I have a question about that. I was thinking about that a lot this week because what alcohol does is it narrows your focus to the present and it makes you opaque to threats, essentially. So it's quite fun in that regard because it allows you to be enthusiastic without any concern for the future. Now, the problem with that is you tend to act like a jackass. Now, but there's an advantage, too. It's like, because I wonder about this. When you have men and women who are on the front lines and they're putting their life at risk and they've been there for like a week and a half. I used to think this about the oil riggers in Alberta too. They go off and they have a couple of days off and they want to blow off some steam. And so they have a riotous party. And riotous parties are where stupid things happen. But having said that, I don't exactly understand how much steam you do have to blow off in order to be able to tolerate the life that you're leading, that high stress, anything is possible at a moment's notice life. And so I don't know how much off-duty discipline, let's say, it's reasonable and realistic to insist upon. Now, I've already said, I know what alcohol contributes to these sorts of situations, but by the same token, it's like, how much do people need to let off steam? And so I'm kind of curious about what you think about that. You've been around men in those situations for a very long time.
And I'll say again, you're right. And it's whether it's in the officer's mess or the private's mess or the office Christmas party, that kind of stuff. But so I know, and there was a lot of the drinking went on, but I never felt threatened, and so you would be in a mess. I'm thinking up in the Gold Line Heights, for example, there's maybe 40 or 50, and there's three women up there, and I didn't see it. I saw them getting drinking too much, perhaps, and then out came the arguments over the Maple Leafs versus the Canadians and singing the regimental songs, and somebody got, when the karaoke machines came out, it was bad news, and then it was, but you were still, if you're on a military base, there's still regulations, right? The mess closes, everybody goes back and you're sleeping in your quarters. And so I saw more sort of fist fights break out than I saw kind of anything with a sexual overtone.
And things have changed since then as well, by the way. I mean, all our missions now are essentially, you don't drink. They're dry missions. Afghanistan was all dry, except when you got off the island, off the mission and went into Kuwait or wherever. Ships are all dry now, right? I mean,
when they're at sea.
So when they pull up into shore, then you have parties and you have so on and so forth.
So that's been rectified.
So things have changed a lot. I mean, when I was commanding officer from 89 to 91. Already started some young officers saying, well, no, I don't want to go to happy hour. In my day, when I was a young officer, it was, on Friday night, you go to happy hour, here's a beer, here's a cigarette, you're going to smoke, you're going to drink. And that's plenty. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but by the time, so early 90s, then, young men and women were becoming more fit. I said, no, I a glass of orange juice and that'd be just great. And they, it's 6 o'clock, I'm going home. That's it. In the old days, we'd party till 11 every Friday night.
So the evolution of I say generational evolution of these aspects of let's call it the organizational culture, because I know you want to talk about culture to some degree. They've evolved, and they've evolved as much because of the participants in the culture as they have from organizational dictum. You know, there's been a sense of, okay, we need to modernize this. But a lot of people are finding other outlets for that letting off steam, as you characterized it. A lot of it is, there is a lot of fitness. It's different. It's different as it is in society. It's different. But that doesn't mean it still doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that people are still not going to get drunk and do stupid things.
Yeah, well,
but
that's inevitable.
there's a difference between getting drunk and doing stupid things and getting drunk and doing nasty, malicious things. And that's where, and it is hard. In the premise of your, how do you make that distinction? Well, you have to say, you have to establish expected norms of behavior, and those evolve over time. What was acceptable 30, 20 years ago it is not necessarily acceptable, not because it's politically correct, but just because we've changed. So, you know, drinking at sea. I use that as an example. I was the one, in fact, that banned drinking at sea for a variety of reasons, including, and the way you characterized your previous research experience was, it was like deja vu. It was the senior non-commissioned members of the Navy at a particular board meeting who said to me, Admiral, we're telling you 99% of our problems are alcohol related. All this misconduct, you can bin it all into drunk. If they weren't drunk at the time, the chances of them having done whatever it was pretty slim to none.
So there's the, you know, there go my people. I am their leader, so I must follow them. This is what you were getting this from the troops.
Yeah.
So telling you.
The senior leadership, the senior non-commissioned, they're telling me we have a problem and we need you, admirals, wearing your big pants to do something about it. So we said, okay, let's look at this. Let's study it to the best we can in the context of our own little ecosystem, and let's come up with some progressive approaches that didn't ban it entirely, because that would be punitive and just silly, and that doesn't just accept the status quo, but says, okay, you know what? Drinking at sea is dangerous, first of all, because you're operating extreme. It's like it would be, using your oil rig analogy, they don't allow them to drink on an oil rig for very good reasons.
So they can keep their hands.
Right, or not kill somebody accidentally because they're drunk. So how about that as a thought process? And yes, so that evolved over time.
But I think we also have to remember that the military, the armed forces, are more generally conservative. So for change to happen, they used to say, what was it? It's the only thing harder than getting a new idea in the military mind is taking out an old idea, you know? And but it's true. It changes slowly. But
the Navy, hundreds of years tradition, not impeded by progress.
Exactly.
It's kind of,
that's right.
It's jokes.
But they're jokes, but they come from
jokes.
somewhere. They come from somewhere. And in fact, so you have to, but you know, you look at this evolution of alcohol and all that, and it's and so is there a big culture change required? I'm with Barbara. I think, no, I think, you know, you need to make sure that people understand that, you know, that you have to, you know, respect others and in all kind of ways and everything, and you root out those predators.
And you're not alone. That was the big thing. That's the hardest thing for me when I see on TV when something happened. A victim says, "This happened to me," and there was nowhere to turn to, and I have a real hard time with that, because the military. Okay, it's huge. It's a family. You've met people throughout your whole career. Even if you've been in 2 or 3 years, you've got people you were on this course with or trained with, and so your chain of command is not welcoming to your complaint.
It's a failure of leadership. Barb, to your point, when you see these things, they are fundamentally failures in leadership.
Are you tired of feeling sluggish, run down, or just not your best self? Take control of your health and vitality today with Balance of Nature. With Balance of Nature, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and vegetables every day. Balance of Nature takes fruits and vegetables, they freeze dry them, turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. The capsules are completely void of additives, fillers, extracts, synthetics, pesticides, or added sugar. The only thing in Balance of Nature fruit and veggie capsules are fruits and veggies. Right now, you can order with promo code Jordan to get 35% off your first order, plus get a free bottle of Fiber and Spice. Experience Balance of Nature for yourself today. Go to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Jordan for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get a free bottle of Fiber and Spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Jordan for 35% off your first preferred order, plus a free bottle of Fiber and Spice.
So you pointed out very early on that you hadn't experienced the sorts of things that you've been. Okay, but I'm wondering too, like, there's a cultural element to that, a sociological element, let's say, but there's also a personal element. Like, I'll give you an example of this. Daughters of alcoholics are much more statistically likely to marry alcoholics. Now, we don't know why that is. We don't know if they find men who are drinking and because that they're accustomed to that, they pick those men, or we don't know if they covertly reinforce their husbands for drinking to the point where they become alcoholic. But it's such a widespread phenomena that if you're doing genetic analysis of the transmission of alcoholism, you have to take into account this issue of assortative mating, it's called. Okay, so now the issue is, was there a manner in which you conducted yourself personally that made you less likely to be the target of such unwanted attention? That might have to do with alcohol consumption. And then also, is it reasonable to assume that your experience is emblematic of the experience of females in the military, or were you, for whatever reason, protected personally or more fortunate?
So first of all, women that join the military, I think, tend to be, well, certainly in my time, they tended to be, like, not everybody's going to want to join the military. So I think that maybe they're a little bit more outspoken. I don't know. I would say that, like, it didn't happen to me, but I didn't see it happening around me. And I was close to a lot of women in the military, and nobody.
And you were there early.
Yeah, but nobody came. Like, even at the end of my career, when I was in NDHQ, and like, nobody would. I didn't hear about people saying, "This happened to me. What are we going to do about it?" I think that the majority of women, it didn't happen to, and I think that the ones that did, yes, absolutely, they should, seek justice. But I also think that, to say there was nowhere to go, I mean, you had your peers, you had the Padres. We have Padres that doors open all the time. You had medical staff. You had somebody that you worked with on a course. There were so many avenues that you could go through. The physical training guys and girls. Like, there were so many places that you could go for help. I find it astonishing when I hear this happened to me, and it happened to me over, and I had nowhere to turn to. That I really have a hard time with that.
So now, when you entered the military, what response did you get from the men?
Well, okay, so we do, and we put it, okay, so nowadays you wouldn't have, like, our lockers in the military police, like, it wasn't a changing locker, but we kept our gun in there, and, like, our ticket books and all that sort of stuff. So you were never there undressed, but so we were all together, men and women. And there wasn't one locker that didn't have Miss January or whatever, in the thing. So nowadays that's just not cool. And so I responded to that by remember Burt Reynolds in Cosmopolitan, and I put him up in my locker. And we never had a problem with that again. Like, it just, the guys went, I'm not looking at that every day. So, well, and then that was it. And then, and it took a while, but I think that I don't think it was hostile. I think it was more, they didn't know how to act. I had a flat tire once in my police car in Edmonton. You know how cold it is there? A flat tire. Nope, I know how to change a tire. So I'm changing the tire. And I do see another military police car go by. Fine, change tire. I come in, the usual ribbing, just like the guys would get. But this one military police corporal, he's waiting. He's waiting at the end. And he says, Barbara, he said, listen, he said, I drove past you today. I said, yeah, I saw you. And he said, I didn't know what to do.
Right.
He said, if you'd have been Mike, I would have stopped to help him. But I thought you were going to say, oh, you think I can't do this? Then I didn't know what to do. And I said, next time, stop the effing car, kind of thing. And we were cool after that, right? But that was the kind of things that they didn't really know what to do. They didn't really know how to deal with it. And this idea that men and women are interchangeable, I have a hard time with that too.
Okay, so I want to delve into that.
I really have a hard time with that. So go ahead.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So I might as well get myself in trouble right off the bat. So I spent a lot of time in academia, and I could see it tilting in the manner that it has tilted, the same manner that, in principle, the military is now predetermined to tilt on the cultural side. And I've been trying to sort out exactly why that is. Now, I've seen a lot of infantilization of students, a lot, like way too much, and infantilization of faculty, for that matter. And then I wonder, like, if you introduce women en masse into an administrative institution, to what degree does that infantilize the situation? And I don't know the answer to that. Neither does anyone else, because we haven't introduced women en masse into administrative institutions before about the last 60 years. So we have no idea exactly what's going to happen. So there's going to be female social pathologies, just like there are male social pathologies. And infantilization seems to me to be a very high probability outcome. So now, and that's definitely not something that you want in the military. It's bad enough in academic institutions. And you just also pointed out that you don't believe that men and women are interchangeable. Now, I have a gut reaction to women in frontline combat. Now, for a variety of reasons, I think the primary reason is the consequences for women if they get captured as prisoners of war. That just doesn't seem to me to be, that's not an acceptable situation as far as I can see. I could be convinced otherwise. But you've been in the military a very long time, and you believe that there are intractable differences, let's say, between men and women.
Absolutely.
And I obviously like you gentlemen's opinion on this too. Women are half the workforce, and they're half the intellectual power, and being able to capitalize on what women have to offer is a major deal. We know that more educated women have more educated children. That's not true for men, by the way. So it's female educational attainment that predicts children's educational attainment, not male. And we know that countries that educate women and that make their inclusion in the workforce are much more likely to thrive economically. So we know all that. But we don't know exactly how to integrate men and women, for example, into the military, because that's a tough nut to crack. So what has your experience taught you about that? What role can women play well or better even, possibly?
I think that, so women, when I joined, I think we were at coming up on 10%. And since then, this 25% women has been bandied about forever. And we maxed out at, I think, 15, 16% where we are now, and we're not getting any more than that.
So it's like engineering in that regard.
So what do I think? So I think that women, there's a role for women, but to say that you can interchange, you can take the guy out of the battalion off the ship and just replace him with a woman, that's not always true. And I believe that. And I think for me, it comes down to meritocracy in the specific trade that you have. So military police, here we go again. So we have living quarters on the base. So there's children, there's, women, wives, whatever, and things happen. So we still had the airborne school. So when there was a bar fight, for example, and there was a lot of them, I am quite certain that if we are honest with each other, you are rather going to have one of you as a partner going into a bar fight than me. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Me too. I would rather not have another woman as a partner. However, we also had things like a sexual assault or an abusive relationship or a child who was assaulted. And then in that instance, I'm pretty sure that you guys might rather have me come to make to talk to the woman who's been beaten up or the child who's been abused. Mm-hmm. And so there's room for both. And this idea,
what about on the foreign relations and diplomatic front? Are there roles that women play in the military that
and unfortunately, though, we go there assuming that everybody's as wonderful and free as we are. So, so I went to Syria. I was negotiating the $1 million contracts, and they wouldn't talk to me because I had a UN uniform on, and I was a woman, and it was, so I had to go get my little driver, my 18-year-old Newfoundland driver, and he had to come in and he's, ma'am, I don't know if I should be signing these, just sign them, and because they refused to deal with us.
Right.
And so you're still dealing
so
with
that's
that.
a disadvantage. What about on the advantage side in foreign relations and on the battlefield?
I would say in foreign relations, I would say that we were a novelty still to a lot of different, like the Poles, the Polish battalion, we were a bit of a novelty, even in the Austrians. And so they would, and men traditionally, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to make a blanket comment that the majority of men are still there, kind of the gentleman, like they're going to want to pull out the chair for you and not sit down. And so, I mean, if you were smart, you use that to your advantage. I know I did. Mm-hmm. And it was, and then Rick. I think that women, they calm things down a bit too. Like if there's an argument going on and there's, the Austrians are fighting, we had the Austrians and the Poles were always fighting. Then when the women came in to sit down, the men sort of toned it down because they were gentlemen inherently. And so that was an advantage for women.
When you look at a problem or you have an issue, and whether it's a strategic, operational, tactical issue or whatever, you will want to get as many opinions as possible. You want to consult if you have time. Let's say if you're trying to take a hill over, you sometimes don't have time. But if you're considering an issue, a problem, a challenge, it's always going to be good to have different ways of viewing that issue and getting different opinions on how to solve that issue. Having women in the forces is a strength. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The issue that comes to what you're talking about, combat roles, on a ship, in a submarine, fighter aircraft. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's very difficult. But in my view, if a woman wants to do it, who the heck am I to say she can't? Mm-hmm. If she meets the standards, that's just great. But she has to meet the standard. Mm-hmm. Now, what I do, the second order effect of that, though, is...
So what do you do when people say, well, if the standards discriminate against women, then the standards are sexist? Because that would certainly be the case for upper body strength, for example, generally speaking.
They drop
but there are jobs where you need the upper body strength. I know. So to be in the Armored Corps, to lift a 100-pound bullet round, you need the strength to be able to do it. I'm sure in the Navy there's lots of those kinds of jobs, But what I was going to say is that the second order effect is on the leadership. Now, the young sergeant and the young lieutenant now has to command, his section of 10 people, some of which are women. And now he or she has to have, and sometimes it's a she that's going to command that, has to have a different kind of approach. You can't be the old sergeant of the old days or get down, give me 20 push-ups and that's it, and dirtbag and all. Yeah. It's a different story. So those are challenges that now I never had to, I got out 15 years ago. So I never actually, was faced with that. But it's a different challenge today.
You see, I see this, and at the risk of oversimplifying it, it's kind of like a Venn diagram in my head. So you've got what I would describe as the technical skills of whatever the trade, the occupation. Then there are the physical requirements, which might be as much what we would call in our business environmental. So they're different. When you're in a tank or it's different than being on a ship. But there are physical requirements that are there. And then there's this, I would argue, ill-defined sense of the social part of it. I'm just going to put social in quotes because I'm not I'm not educated in that regard, but it's all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's where all the other stuff gets weird because people either don't know how to deal with it, and you can have all the training you want, but there are realities to these social dimensions. They're not just gender specific, but there are social aspects to how militaries function. And some people are very skilled at those, maybe not as physical, very technical skilled. Other people are very strong, very technically skilled, but have social. And I don't know, I go back to, none of these things are, in my view, none of these things are as black and white as
they're not.
They're very complex issues.
Well, so for example, you mentioned that the Canadian military is topped out at about 15% females, and that's quite intractable. Okay, so exactly the same thing is the case among engineers in the Scandinavian countries. They've gone farther than any other countries on the planet to equalize gender opportunities. But there are intractable differences on the engineering side and on the nursing side. Okay, so now you might ask why that is. Now, men and women are pretty much the same in terms of raw cognitive ability. The male curve might be a little flatter, so there might be more extreme male geniuses and males who have cognitive problems. There's some debate about that. Men and women are about equal in conscientiousness, which is the next best predictor, say, for administrative, managerial, and military jobs. But men and women differ radically in their interests. It's the biggest difference between men and women. And men are much more likely than women to be interested in things, and women much more than men to be interested in people. And that's a major determinant of occupational choice. And it really stands out in the difference between engineers, thing-oriented, and nurses, people-oriented. And so given the nature of the military, the engineering-like nature of the military, the probability that without undue force, we're going to get to 50% women strikes me as zero. Now, and the idea that the ideologues have that that's a cultural issue is nonsense, because the other thing that's been demonstrated in Scandinavia, this is so cool. Imagine you rank ordered nations by how egalitarian their social policies are. Okay, now you looked at them in terms of differences between male and female in occupational choice. Okay, the biggest differences are in the most egalitarian countries. So if you free women and men up so that there aren't systemic barriers to their movement into an occupation, the occupational differences magnify, they don't decrease, right? And I think that's an unshakable finding, right? So there's no amount of cultural gerrymandering that's going to bring women up to 50% in the military. It's a foolish goal, and it's based on a misapprehension of how human beings function. The ideologues think we're all socially constructed, and that's nonsense. If you flatten the playing field, men and women maximize in their differences. So, and that's what you'd expect for people who are pursuing their destiny freely and in accordance with their own interests. And it does seem to be interest. We don't exactly know what interest is, from a scientific perspective, why women would tilt towards people, except broadly.
Nurturing thing,
right?
The women
but we don't know how that manifests itself, say, in day-to-day choices exactly.
Which is, I find a bit ironic in some respects, because if you were, from an insider's perspective, if you were to characterize the military,
don't care for people much.
In theory, okay, we would describe ourselves as a people-centric organization, which is fascinating. Sure, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of things, a lot of kit.
Well, it's fraternal.
Right. And so, I was quite struck by what you said.
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between...
Tells me we're doing something fundamentally wrong.
No, I think there's fraternal hierarchy and there's community of care. And I don't think those are the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So men can organize themselves, but when men organize themselves, they organize themselves into hierarchies, right? And so that's not a community of care exactly.
The best leaders, I think, obviously will have care for their people.
Yeah.
I mean, and that whole nurturing thing, I think, is not just a part of the women, but you're right, perhaps, what do you call it?
Comes in with men, it comes in mentoring.
Right. It comes in mentoring, and I think the best leaders who care for their people and, want to, see them do well. And I always described, sometimes being in charge and being with your team, there's I could describe it as love, actually.
Yeah.
And I loved my people when I commanded them and that I had in my group. And sometimes people are kind of, love. Yeah, well, it's a kind of love. You want to hug them. You want to, keep...
So I talked to Jocko Willink, who's a Navy SEAL, and we've talked 3 or 4 times. And Jocko, he's about 3 feet thick. He's like a man's man, that's for sure. Yeah. And Jocko wanted to be a soldier from the time he was 3. Okay. He's blowing things up when he was 3. And he told me quite frankly that, he was a pretty rough adolescent and he could have taken a criminal pathway. But he went to the military. And one of the things that he found very rapidly was that opportunity to mentor was the best thing he'd ever found in his whole life. And that ethos of care among men does seem to make itself manifest in that mentoring. And I think that's I hope my people do well is different than I want to protect my people.
Right.
Right. I mean, you do want to protect them,
Yeah.
but it's not the same emphasis, right?
Yeah.
There's an encouragement emphasis in that that's, I think, more characteristic also of the role men play in a family, right? Because men are, for example, men specialize in rough and tumble play with their kids. It's rougher and it's more encouraging. It's less sheltering and nurturing.
Yeah.
So
the mission is important too, though, right? Like looking after your people or doing, like, our number one priority has to be the mission. So whatever your mission is. And so sometimes, you're going to have to send somebody home because they're not like, great guy, you want to look after him or whatever, but the mission comes first.
Yeah,
and those are decisions then that the nurturing goes out the window, whatever the hierarchy, it's the mission is the most important.
Yeah, and that's a rough one.
That is a tough one.
And that goes back to something you said a while ago with respect to, again, I'm paraphrasing, there's a tension between the desire to do all of these progressive things and the fundamental purpose of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
The institution is mission focused. If it's not mission focused, then why do you have it?
Right.
Militaries exist to fight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you define it to do something else,
or to be intimidating enough to make fighting unnecessary.
well, yeah, exactly. That they're a deterrent.
Yeah.
And so this notion, and you said it earlier, Barb. It's like, well, you can't have both. The warrior culture is in and of itself, and we have this on record, and we have very prominent Canadians who have written reports saying that this is the heart of the problem. Well, hang on, well, okay, time out.
Yeah.
Like,
the mission is the heart of the problem.
Right.
That's a problem.
It's how there may be a whole bunch of issues around how things are being done. I'm open to that conversation, but the notion that this is at its primordial level a fundamental problem, then you're not talking about a military.
Yeah.
And this goes to some
or a country.
I think you want to get in there.
No, but I really think you've hit the nail right on the head here. Here's the problem, is that we have now put more emphasis on all those DEI principles in the military. And I think they've been, by the way, and it was really her idea, but I'm using it, that it's been forced on the Canadian forces, the military, by the government.
Yeah.
This progressive ideology and radical progressive ideology that this government, and I'm not here to talk politically, but that's what I think has happened. And so the forces are having to react to that. And unfortunately, that has taken priority over military effectiveness, military operational capability. And even though a lot of our leaders are trying to stay focused on that, people like, our commander of the Canadian Joint Operations Command, he's focused on operational capability, and he's forced to react to all this DEI business.
Teamwork. I mean, the military, it's a team. And yet now all of a sudden the emphasis is on
the individual.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And you don't even look like, and I think, what is wrong with looking like the uniform should be uniform? Like, the guy for the Montreal Canadiens, I'm going to wear my away uniform tonight. I'm going to wear my home uniform. No, you're all going to wear the same uniform because we're on the same team. And so we've gone away from that. And now we've taken, meritocracy out so that we can fill these imaginary quotas of, what is it, 0.03 or 3.2% of the population. We need to have a representative of this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but a $30 million jet, I want the best person to fly it. I don't want because he fits this quota, or she, or they, I guess, whatever it is, they fit this quota. And how then are you going to feel when you are the best pilot, but you don't get chosen because you don't fit
property demoralized.
You don't fit the DEI, you don't fit a certain quota, you don't fit. And okay, for as long as we've been around, 71% of the Canadian military are white males. They are our warrior cultures. They are the guys who, roughneck, whatever you want to call it, the farmer's sons, the fisherman's sons, the guys, and they join the military. And so and we'd spend not a penny recruiting to these guys.
It's worse than that, by the way. It's worse than that. We know that the best predictor on the personality side for military prowess is conscientiousness. Okay, conscientious people are meritocratic based, right? That's their hierarchy of value. So if you're trying to get conscientious people into the military, which you need to do if you're going to have a military, then the best way to dissuade them is to set up an anti-meritocratic operation, because they can't stand that. They're the guys that are going to want to go into the military and incrementally improve so they can advance forward through the ranks in a dutiful, patriotic, orderly, and industrious manner. That's conscientiousness.
Yeah.
And that uniformity, it's the same with business suits. Like, the idea was, because a business suit is a modified military uniform, the idea was to signal that you're putting aside your own individual idiosyncrasies for your fellow platoon members, let's say, and the mission, right? And so it's not like you're trivial, because you're not, but your concerns are not the concerns of the platoon or the mission, and you wear the uniform to signify that. And if you can't make that sacrifice, if you're unwilling to, then, well, go do your own thing. It's not like we have a draft
Well, and you can demonstrate your individuality when you're in the military, but do it outside those times when you're wearing the uniform.
Right,
If you want to wear
right.
an earring when you're on leave, well, go, enjoy yourself and all that. That's got nothing to do with sexual orientation or any of this business. I'm talking uniforms specifically. And so all those things, forcing the DEI, the emphasis on individuality over team, that is having a huge impact on morale in the military.
Yeah. Well, and how do you know that?
Because
recruitment would be one issue.
We've seen actually the Canadian Chaplain General has actually gone out and spoken. All his padres have gone out, and he's come back, and he's I think this about a year ago that he said morale is shot. I'm getting information from
that in and of itself is a significant data point.
Well, right.
I'm getting
right. But you believe this is reliable?
Chaplain General.
It's a huge thing.
Okay.
This is
It's really
institutional. This has been typically a very private organization that is focused on spiritual well-being, morale, all of these extremely important but subjective aspects of the institution to go public and say,
when he writes a report to the Chief of Defense Staff,
we have
this
a
is
problem.
a big friggin' deal. On top of that, I'm getting, and you probably do as well, from former or serving officers and soldiers who write to me and say, hey, listen, morale is horrible. There are organizations now run by veterans, young veterans, who kind of tell all those serving who can't speak out publicly, but they want to gather the information. And the information I am getting right now is that morale is shot. One of the reasons is because they see our senior leaders, serving senior leaders, not fighting back against this process that the government is forcing on the
so
military.
it takes out their faith in the leadership.
So it takes out their faith in the leadership.
Yeah.
They're saying, holy crap, and okay,
Who are
you're
we
going to have the
fighting
odd
for?
one
Yeah.
who likes to have his hair long. Fine. But, when I joined, I had my hair down to my shoulders. I had my, haircut. I got a buzz cut and everything. And
plus they're not
it was understood.
They're not seeing public support. They're not seeing
Yeah.
they're not seeing overt signals from the political leadership that what they do actually matters.
Right.
Because the political leadership is focused on those other metrics.
Yeah.
The importance of service. Okay, so when the Prime Minister and Minister Blair brought out the defense policy update, you read what the Prime Minister said. Did he at any time in that speech talk about the importance of service, the honor of serving your country, that it's a great place to actually, do something for yourself, but also for others and
The
so on.
fundamental purpose why the armed
Well,
forces.
again, those are all conscientiousness-related
Correct.
virtues. Well, so here's something interesting on the political side. So what tilts you towards a progressive radicalism is high openness, creativity, and low conscientiousness. What tilts you towards a
so
conservative orientation?
there's no rules. Basically, do whatever you want.
Well, the idea
Yeah.
there would be is that your best, think about it as an ecological niche. So for those people, the ecological niche is all that territory that hasn't been ordered, or the space where rules could be changed or bent. The space of novelty. And that's a great space to occupy if you happen to be creative. But you're not a rule follower. You tend not to be particularly patriotic. You're not dutiful. You're not conscientious. You're not orderly.
There's no loyalty. There's no sense
that's
of...
not with openness specifically. No, that comes with conscientiousness. And, the fact that you didn't see any testimony, let's say, to those virtues in that speech is an indication of the temperament of the person and the political party that offered those, because that isn't what they see as valuable.
And
that's hard on conscience.
And this is not, the Liberal Party. This is the government of Canada.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, agnostically, this is our boss. This is the guy who runs the country.
Yeah.
So, and if he doesn't think service is important, if he doesn't think that honorable service in the military is important, well,
because
it permeates from there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because the rank and file are struggling with all of these issues that we've been discussing, plus the realities that they're being asked to be away from their families.
Yeah.
Their equipment is rusting.
Crap.
And
They can always buy new equipment themselves.
Yeah.
Right. They don't feel that the institutional leadership, organizational leadership is focused on the right things. And that exists in every organization. When you're at the bottom and you're looking up, the tree full of the tree full of monkeys.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
Yeah,
Monkeys'
exactly.
asses,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the notion being that all of these things are contributing to a malaise.
Okay, so I want to
just before you go, so now coming back to General Carignan being appointed, she has to leave this stuff behind now. If she wants to start making an impact immediately on the troops and that, she's going to have to now focus on, maybe what we have not been focused on. The institutional, she's now the head of the institutional leadership in the armed forces.
Behind the culture changes.
Exactly. So she has a huge challenge in front of her.
Well,
and it's gonna be interesting.
The challenge is, will she be given the mandate, the authority, and the resources that are necessary to use a nautical term to right the ship?
Right.
Because if not, then we will have squandered an incredible opportunity, which is to take a great leader who is a warrior, who has demonstrated her
Yeah.
professional competence,
Mhm, mhm.
and happens both positively and negatively
He
to
doesn't
be
care.
wearing the
You crazy guy.
bridle of
He doesn't
first female
care.
to do the job, and we potentially squander it because the institution, for other reasons, will be no better off at the end of her watch than it was at the beginning.
There's-
Well, so it sounds like the three of you
better.
have some faith in her fundamental abilities.
Well, we
There's
know her to some
naive.
degree.
Yeah.
I mean,
She's a classmate of
Maybe I'm an
Barbara.
Yeah.
from military college. Yeah. And so one of the things that I liked about, that I admired about Jenny in the early days is back in the day, for some reason it seemed if you were a woman in the military and you wanted to succeed in this man's world, well, you better start looking like one and talking like one. And there was these women and they left behind whatever feminine traits or qualities they had. It was like the minute you don't hide that, you're not going to go anywhere. And then Jenny came along and she wanted to be a combat engineer or a flamenco dancer. About
Oh,
that
yeah.
was her two
Oh,
things,
yeah.
right? And so she even when she was a full colonel,
she's done both.
yes,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
even
yeah.
as a full colonel, and we had the American Idol or CMR Idol, the takeoff for the kids in mess, and she did her dancing. She's a mother of four, and she doesn't want to
Hide
look
her
like
femininity.
she doesn't hide her femininity.
She's the,
So I like that
she's the
about
full
her.
package. There's no
So
question.
she is.
So how do you account for the fact that she got tangled up in this DEI? Was that like inevitable?
Yeah,
Like,
they created a command. So they decided, the government forced this, and I will say that it was forced upon us, and that it's horrible. The military, it's misogynistic, it's just
patriarchal,
warrior,
yeah,
patriarchal, blah blah blah. So we have to change this. So they created a command, and I think wasn't the budget $500 million over 5? We could have done with that money. And so she
And a
then
lot-
was
a
the
lot of people.
yeah. So
A
she
lot of
was the chief of that command, and they had to. So I look at what happened. Okay, so we tried DEI. How's that working out for us? Not great. We're way down. We're still way down. 16,000 in personnel.
16,000 out of how many?
We're short, so we should have.
60,000, probably about 100,000 if you take the regular
And the reserves together.
So you're 15% below where you should
And
be.
15%, by the way, in wartime, 15%, your unit is no longer combat capable, have to be pulled back from the thing. So you could actually say that the armed forces are non-combat capable today.
Because of the
Because
manpower
of the-
shortage.
yeah.
But
And
of course,
there's a lot of math behind
Yeah,
it.
it is.
That- yeah.
As well, because that's on paper, and then you add on the layer on top of this, and a lot of organizations have similar issues with respect to, even though you might be at 85%, of that remaining 85%, a bunch of them are unavailable for a variety of reasons, from medical to administrative.
Right.
How
Anything.
many?
Well, you're probably looking at a number of several thousand.
No, I
I've
would
seen
say,
numbers
yeah.
as high as 8,000
You know,
not only
training.
that, not
out
only that.
of the remaining. So another
So that's another
10%,
5%.
another
Yeah.
10% of what's
So it's
left.
20. I see.
Yeah.
So
And
you're looking at a
unfortunately-
20% shortfall at the moment.
Not just that, but the people who are missing are the center core. So that you've got your warrant, your sergeant,
Yeah.
your lieutenant, your captain. Well,
Yeah, they
captain
have all
major,
So that, yeah.
the experience.
who took 20 years to get there. So even if you recruit 16,000 people tomorrow,
20
they're not going
years
to.
to
It's going to take them time to get there for technicians, fighter pilots. Fighter pilots have been down for years and years. We're missing.
Well, we
200.
can't even train them in Canada anymore, so we don't
Well,
have
that's right.
we don't have the training. But so like, going back to the culture change. So it was the culture.
Strange that you can't find enough fighter pilots. I mean, God, you'd think that.
Unbelievable.
Well,
Isn't it?
because, but I'm
Unbelievable.
going to say to you that's a function of DEI. So I mean, so the culture change,
Man.
get rid of the way we think, the way we behave, that whole warrior mentality. So that's where the attrition went, I think.
Yeah, well, that's
By
gonna get rid of
20
the fighter
years. He
pilots
says,
now,
"I'm
isn't
done.
it?"
I'm not doing this."
Yeah,
She
right.
says she's out. So now we're implementing the DEI. So we're targeting this 2.3, whatever quota, whatever you non-binary, whatever you want to fill in, Indigenous, female, whatever it is. So we're targeting this person. So there's my 4 fighter pilots, Jordan,
Yeah,
who
right.
are lined up that want to
Well,
join, and they
yeah.
don't even get a medical appointment
Yeah.
because I got quotas to fill.
Men, are you looking for freedom? Are there things in your life that are holding you back from being the man that you're called to be? If you're looking to build a life plan that is ordered towards prayer and discipline alongside other like-minded men, then you need to check out Exodus 90 app. The Exodus 90 app offers a daily companion to help you grow closer to God and to become the man you want to be, the man you need to be. On the app, you can join thousands of men for St. Michael's Lent, which starts August 15th and leads up to the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel on September 29th. St. Michael's Lent is an ancient tradition of prayer and fasting popularized by St. Francis in the Middle Ages that's been lost in our time. Let's bring it back. Join the men of Exodus 90 and Father Carlos Martins, Catholic priest and host of the Exorcist Files, who will serve as our spiritual guide for St. Michael's Lent this year on the Exodus 90 app. We will awaken to invisible realities and enter into the spiritual battle that rages around us all the time. Go to exodus90.com/JBP for a 14-day free trial of the Exodus 90 app and to learn more about St. Michael's Lent. That's exodus90.com/JBP to join us for St. Michael's Lent starting August 15th.
The fundamental problem with that, especially as you start stacking up the intersectional requirements, is that you actually end up with no candidate pool, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, your candidate pool for fighter pilots is going to be very restricted to begin with, right? So then the next question would be, well, are there any of those DEI candidates even hypothetically available? And the answer to that is likely no. And even if there were, the probability that they'll be qualified or interested is vanishingly small.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, even in the academic realm, when we were, as long as I was an academic, as long as I'd been an academic, if you were a minority, you had more than a fighting chance with the hiring committee, like seriously more of a fighting chance. It was pretty much your position to lose.
Yeah.
But all that meant still was that there was no way we could come to the kind of parity that was required by the people who think that, you know, every category has to be filled. There just wasn't the people just weren't there. They just didn't exist, and you couldn't make them out of whole cloth.
Exactly.
And so a 20% decrement. Okay, so we started this out, and we have to draw this to a close fairly soon. We started this out with something we didn't probably emphasize enough, which was the nature of the crisis. Now, you know, we alluded to the fact that Canada, let's say, is woefully unprepared now on the classic military front, also with regard to all the new forms of warfare that are multiplying faster than people can even imagine, that we have a widespread problem of demoralization and that recruitment is not working. Okay, so, but I didn't get the sense that we did a sufficiently good job of telling Canadians that, you know, there's smoke and fire. It's like that this is a real problem. And so, like, what do you feel are the consequences, even the short-term consequences, let's say, of Canada continuing to be unprepared in this manner? So
this goes to Mike's intervention early in the conversation about this notion of a perfect storm. So at the very moment in time, this period in time when we have the dimensions of the crisis that you've just summarized, we are incapable, therefore, of participating, contributing, and doing our fair share, for lack of a better characterization, in a global system that needs us.
Right. So we look incompetent, just at minimum.
So at a minimum, we look incompetent or disinterested.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah.
Neither of them is a particularly good look for
both.
a G7 country.
Yeah, right.
Right? Then we have the actual practical challenges around the security issues. We look at our ability to contribute or not to the alliance. Are we doing enough? We never are doing enough.
Yeah.
We're doing what we can, but that is insufficient. And so the implication from a Canadian perspective is that Canada, that depends as much, if not more than many other countries in the world on these global systems for our way of life, is unable to make any meaningful contribution to the preservation, reinforcement, and ultimately protection of all of these systems.
Right.
And so, but that's a hard sell, and I get why it's a hard sell, which is why, and this is a very personal plea, I do not believe, notwithstanding the need for Canadians to understand this, that this should be an interest of, or this should be an issue of public interest or public opinion. And I have told political leaders who will listen to me that if you are following public opinion on these issues, you are not leading. And this is an issue of
my suspicion
leadership.
too is that if the public was informed, as we're attempting to do now, that the discovery would be that far more Canadians, especially of the conservative and classic liberal bent, would be behind intelligent policy related to the military.
I can only, 100% support what Mark's saying. If a government wants to govern for Canada, for all Canadians, and this is the right thing to do, to have armed forces that can protect Canadians, but also intervene in internationally wherever we want. You need to be able to spend the money. Some social programs are going to have to be lessened, in terms of how much we spend on them, but it's always, guns, butter. You can have both. And right now we don't have enough guns, frankly. That's where we are today.
Or people holding guns.
Or
people
butter.
holding guns.
Or butter.
Or butter. Yeah. But the point is, and I agree with you 100% as well, that if a government decided that, then it's a matter of going out and telling Canadians. It has to start at the top, though. Again, I say the Prime Minister, of our country, doesn't matter what persuasion he is, doesn't even talk about it. When he talks about the defense policy update, it's going to be good. He's going to get closer to 2%. No one cares about that. For the moment, we need somebody who cares about service to our country, who's going to make service an honorable thing for people to do, who's going to fund the military, who's going to improve morale and so on. And I think if you explain it to Canadians, they will understand.
I think
and we need the leaders themselves. The ones in uniform are going to have to buck up a little bit. Can I say that? I was going to say something else, but I'll say grow up there, but I'm not going to say that.
But fair enough. Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
Yes.
Now, we talked at the beginning a little bit about the fact that, look, I know that the military personnel, the leadership in particular, are fundamentally supposed to shut the hell up about political matters. And they are in a very strict chain of command. And by and large, they should stay there. But you three, who should know, have indicated that we have something on our hands in the order of a crisis. And I don't imagine you're like Chicken Little, sky is falling sort of people. And so at some point, it becomes incumbent on people who are attempting to serve the country to bring such things to the attention of Canadians. And so why why is that not happening as much as it might in your?
Well, I think that, again, I not political, but I think that our military, like I watch on television in the last few years where there's an announcement about the military and Wayne Eyre's not even there. Our chief of defense staff is not, it's Anita Nan that's making the announcement. The minister's making the announcement beside the prime minister. What the hell? Like, you look at the Americans and there's the Joint Chiefs, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he's there beside him.
So what do you think that indicates?
So I think that, I don't know, maybe the generals are going to need to say, okay, like, no, this is still my ship, my armed forces, and I need to have more of a say. And I don't know, I think the next government, that's going to be more likely, because this government just seemed to find the idea of a uniform somehow unsavory and hid it away. I mean, when was the last time that
we had a uniform, I might say.
But when was the last time you saw a Rick Hillier, for example, up there calling them scumbags and whatever else, and him saying, yeah, well, you can talk to and people listening, Canadians, we're enamored of that. And you need a hero. Everybody loves a hero. And we're not producing enough. We're not showing, we have heroes, but we're not showing them enough.
Well, then on that front too, like you talked about 3 gentlemen whose careers were demolished, the 3 senior officers.
Art McDonald, Danny Fortin, and Steve Whalen.
Right, in the name of culture change. And so my suspicions are that sort of action is also quite likely to dissuade people from having something to say.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay,
I mean, we have an example, and I'll talk about, Vice Admiral Octorloni and Vice Admiral Topshee, 2 senior, 3-star admirals. Topshee commands the Navy currently. And he made a video about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, where he talked about the challenges of the Navy. Now, as a leader, that's what you want to do. You want to inform your troops. You want to make sure you communicate with them that, okay, things are tough, boys and girls, but there's stuff coming down the pipe. And, he did what a good leader would do. I'm sure the government was very unhappy with him releasing that video. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. The other guy is Octorloni. So
what's the video?
The video is the Royal Canadian Navy commander makes a video about the state of the Navy today. And it's
how long is that video?
I think
about 6 minutes, maybe.
6 minutes.
Yeah, but it's excellent. It's
okay, will
really
you send me the link to that? Because maybe we'll put it on this show.
Sure, I can.
If that would be useful.
Sure, I can do it.
Okay. Okay.
The other guy is Bob Octorloni. So he commands the Canadian Joint Operations Command. He commands all the military operations outside and inside the country. He's kind of the Mr. Operator. He does that on behalf of the Chief of Defense Staff. So he was in an interview, I don't know with whom, but he talked about, the world today. And he talked about, because he's the guy that gets all the intelligence, and he talked about the dangers, the threats to our country, and so on and so forth. And he was very open, and he said, Canadians don't realize how dangerous the world is today.
And that was another video, or
it's an
mainstream media interview.
Yeah.
In one of the papers, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. But the notion being that there are little pockets
of people who are speaking
out. And I was always told, I don't know if it's the same with you, but when the media would come around and they would say, can we talk to your soldiers? The soldiers knew they could talk about what they were doing, exactly what you couldn't talk about, I hate the policy of the government on this. And frankly, when I look at what Topshee did and I look at what Octorloni did, they talked about their job. They talked, my job is the operator, and my job is to know what's going on in the world. And I don't think people understand that this is going on. The other guy, Topshee, he said, well, what's going on in my command? Oh, I'm telling you, troops. And I'm sure he did it for his sailors.
He did. It was
and it was really good.
So your point is that there is a way for military leaders to speak out,
there is,
to inform the population and their own men and women about what's going on without stepping outside of the chain of command.
Right. However,
becoming politically disloyal.
Exact loyalty is the key.
Right.
However, the government sometimes says no.
You're
not allowed.
Well, the government can also be pushed back when they're out of their bailiwick. So, but your sense is that there is a place there where public pronouncements are appropriate and possible, and that you've seen some of them.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's close with this. I'll just give each of you a chance for a closing statement to speak directly to the Canadian public and also the international community, because there'll be lots of people who aren't Canadian watching this as well. So just anything at all. What would you like to emphasize? Let's say, Barbara, maybe you could start. What would you like to emphasize? Let's say to young women, possibly.
So I would
considering a career.
Young women today, they're a lot stronger when you think from the interactions I've had with our young officer cadets. And I would say, ladies, there's nothing to be afraid of. You've got this. Join the military. You are going to have, the experience of a lifetime. You can learn to be and do whatever you want to do, and don't listen to too many negative comments, because you can handle this. We handled it back then. You can handle it today. That would be my comment to them.
Okay.
Well, I would say, for me, I think service to your country and service in the military is a fantastic career. And I think any young man or woman who doesn't actually consider it, at least consider it, not necessarily do it, but consider it. Have a look at what's available out there and look at it compared to civilian employment. I think you're missing out.
Okay, so let me zero in on that a little bit. So let's take kid who's just about to graduate from high school.
Right.
So starting to figure out, maybe from a small town or a city for that matter, trying to figure out what to do next. Okay, so why exactly do you think the military might be on his or her list of of consideration?
Well,
and who, for what kind of student should be thinking
well,
about this?
if first of all, if you've got good marks and you're in fairly decent physical shape, then being an officer, and if you're in high school, you're going to look at going to university.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to university, let's say, and if you don't want to go to university, first of all, you could join as a soldier, sailor, aviator, or whatever. Great career. You can have great. My son is in the Navy. My daughter's in the Army and the reserves. They've had great careers. They love it. However, if you're looking at going to university, have a look at what the military college provides you.
Yeah, right.
Okay, it's a 4-pillar program. You'll get a degree. You're going to get military leadership experience because they're going to teach you, and so on. You're going to be bilingual. They're going to teach you how to speak your other language.
Right.
And you're also going to be in great shape because it's a 4-pillar program physically.
And you'll get paid for doing it.
And
Right,
you get
right.
paid.
Which is
And
the
you
thing
get
for
right.
kids.
So you're
Yeah.
while you're
paid
going
for
through.
doing
Yes.
it.
And then
Yes.
what you have to do is serve the number of years that you go to military college. After that, you can get out and do whatever you'd like. However, if you decide to get out, let's say, what a great CV you have, what a
Right,
great curriculum vitae. You've got experience, you've got a degree, you've got some leadership, you're in great shape, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Right. So that's just available for people if they
Or if
want.
that's
Yes.
if that's not your path, then join and get a trade.
Right.
There's literally over 100 different occupations available in the military. From
Well, how would people go finding this out? So
Well,
there's going to be
online.
high school kids.
Online.
Yeah.
it's all online now.
And every one of those occupations, they have a little video, a 3-minute video. You see, what would you be doing if you were this?
Right. And some of them have some of them have 3 or 4 years of intensive academic qualifications, technical skills, and then you combine it with work. And if you're not interested in that, then there's lots of opportunity for what I would characterize as simple adventure, an opportunity to just do really fun and cool things, potentially on the other side of the world, and get some good experience and build some great relationships that will last you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely, yeah.
So was that the end of your?
That's it, my
That
friend.
was your.
Well,
40
that was
minutes?
that was
jump in.
good. That was a good. That was
Super.
good. Well, that's a good positive.
My message would be what I was trying to say earlier. Canadians need to understand that notwithstanding all of the real challenges that they're faced with on a day-to-day basis in this country, we still enjoy an incredible level of privilege and wealth. And that is fragile. We can never take that for granted. And part of not taking that for granted is that we are part of a very complicated global system that depends on a whole bunch of things that depend on security as the foundational element of economics, of social fairness and equality, the rule of law, all these things that are important to us as Canadians, both domestically or internationally, are premised on a secure global system. That system is under threat. It is real. And that is where the vulnerability and threat is to Canada. It's not a physical threat in the form of an invasion, which many new Canadians may have lived in their own experience. It's not that. It's deeper, it's broader, it's a little more esoteric.
It's another kind of invasion.
But it is real and it is coming. And we either want to be part of the answer with respect to how we protect it, or we're going to wake up one morning and wonder where what we thought Canada was all about went.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think what we'll do on the Daily Wire side for everybody watching and listening, I think we'll delve a little bit more deeply into the ideology and the DEI mess and how that came about and what might be done about it. And maybe also talk a little bit more about the problems of security in the digital world. And so if you want to join us on the Daily Wire side, please feel free to do that. And thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you very much for coming in today.
That's a pleasure, yeah.
Well, one of many conversations, I hope. And to everybody watching and listening, thank you very much for your time and attention as well.
If you watch a Trump rally speech for 2 hours and you don't laugh once, you've got a problem. I've known him a long time.
Yeah.
He can make me laugh like very few people. I mean, he's genuinely laugh out loud funny. He called me for a catch-up conversation. We were having a chat. He said, by the way, what happened to Theresa May? I went, well, funny enough, I'm just reading a story this morning that she's now on the speaker circuit. He went, what? I went, yeah, she's getting £140,000 a speech. And Trump, are you effing kidding me? He said, I'd pay £140,000 not to hear her speak. Now, that's just funny.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm in London, UK today. Just arrived this morning. I had the opportunity to speak with Piers Morgan. I've got to know Piers a little bit. He's always treated me very fairly as a journalist, and also my daughter, who he's interviewed a couple of times. And so we had a chance today to sit down and talk. And Piers has moved out of mainstream legacy broadcasting and into the online space. And he's actually kind of a first mover on the European and UK side with regards to such a move. And so he has a very popular enterprise, Piers Morgan Uncensored, which is actually kind of a hybrid between a legacy media news approach and the more free-flowing conversation and investigation that YouTube in particular enables. And so we talked a fair bit about how he got to that point, the development of his career. We talked a fair bit as well about Britain's Got Talent and America's Got Talent and the strict meritocracy that those shows represent and the implications for the value of meritocracy in the public landscape. We talked about his orientation, his increasing orientation in relationship to his own curiosity, his desire to change his mind and to learn, and how that plays into learning to listen and into running an increasingly successful private news and public affairs operation, which is what he has on YouTube, a very, very rapidly growing channel. And we talked a little bit about the British political scene. As most of you know, the UK people elected a new government only a few days ago, headed by Keir Starmer. We had a chance to talk about that as well. And that made up the bulk of our interaction. So join us. So tell me what you've been doing that's particularly interesting. I'd like to know about your work on online in particular. You've really blown up as a journalist. And so what do you think you're doing right? And what have you been doing that's interesting?
I would say the most interesting phase of my entire career has been the last few months. And the reason I would say that is I've run national newspapers for nearly 10 years in the UK. I've judged massive talent shows. America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent. I did CNN, replaced Larry King at CNN. All of these jobs were fascinating. Did a morning show over here. But transitioning out of conventional linear television completely, because we were running with Piers Morgan Uncensored, both a linear vehicle for it and also YouTube. And what was happening was we were getting 100,000 people watching the big shows on the linear version, and we were getting 10 million watching on YouTube. And eventually I went, why are we bothering with the TV version? Because
there's the question. Why are we bothering with the TV version?
Well, I think
that's like a global question.
And I think the answer in 10 years' time is nobody will be.
Yeah.
And I think people like yourself, people like Joe Rogan, people like Ben Shapiro, I think everyone has worked out that anyone under 45 doesn't really watch linear television. They watch it for live sport. They might watch it for a massive breaking news story. But actually what most people under 45 do is they watch apps on their TVs. And in America recently, 10% of American television watchers, it was revealed in a major study, now watch everything on their smart TV through the YouTube app. So that's 1 in 10.
Right.
And that's going to massively, exponentially increase, I think, very quickly. Yeah. So to me, I joke about it, but in a way, I feel like the kind of Justin Bieber of journalism, only very late in the day, where he was a YouTuber who cracked the pop market. And I think I'm now someone who's gone the other way, gone from a kind of slightly stuffier, old version of doing things, and I'm now doing it in a far more streamlined, quick, interesting, and genuinely global way, and it's working.
Yeah, well, you're on the cutting edge of that in the UK in particular. I mean, my sense of the UK YouTube market is that it's 3 or 4 years behind the North American market in terms of what's people's acceptance of YouTube as the primary, or at least online video as the primary video source. So, but you've also managed the transition successfully, so you've managed a lot of transitions in your life successfully, right? It's hard to be successful at one thing. It's a lot harder to be successful at successive things. And a lot of the things you've done have been quite different. So,
but what's one common theme?
Yeah.
I'm a journalist. And actually, what is a journalist? It's somebody who's curious, who's quite judgmental, who's interested in people, who's interested in talent, normally, or people who are able to display a talent at something. I find most journalists are drawn to that. They want to get to the truth. They want to get to answers. When I look at whether I was a newspaper editor, whether I was a talent show judge, whether I was even competing in Celebrity Apprentice with Donald Trump on his show, whether I was doing a morning show, whether I was doing any of these things, or what I'm doing now, the common thread of all of it are that skill set that I developed as a young journalist, I think has held me in brilliantly good stead for every single thing I've done.
And you think that that's been transferable as well to like Britain and America's Got Talent? Because that seems like a fair departure from
Simon
journalism.
Cowell hired me for America's Got Talent, which was the first one of the whole franchise. Because he said, you're just as arrogant, obnoxious, and as judgmental as me.
I see.
What he wanted was somebody who was going to be not afraid to give strong opinions, not afraid to be judgmental, but also had, as he put it, a journalist's eye for talent. You're somebody, he said, who would put pop stars on the front page, or television stars, or whatever it may be, or politicians who were on the rise. So part of your job every day was to look for the next big thing, and to look for the next talented politician, singer, entertainer, whatever. And he said, I want you to apply that same discipline to judging acts on a stage. And actually, he was completely right. It's exactly the same thing. When I saw all these acts, I've never been a juggler or a fire eater or, had any experience of
Everybody's a
piano
juggler.
playing pigs. Yeah, exactly. I've never tried, but I've never had any real experience of being any good at any of the things that the people in front of me were doing. But what I was good at was identifying ones that I felt a mass audience would like, that they would think were good. So I was able to judge talent far better than I was able to do any of the things that they were all doing for me. That comes down to the journalistic chops that I think were honed in me from a young age. Part of a journalist job when you're running a newspaper, when you're doing a big CNN nightly global show, doing a loud, noisy morning show, part of it is identifying what you should be talking about and what you think other people would be interested in talking about. So that, again, just comes down to having an instinct, which I think a lot of journalists have. So I think the running theme is the journalism.
Yeah, well, it's that capacity to separate wheat from chaff. I mean, I've watched Britain's Got Talent and America's Got Talent a fair bit. I have a real soft spot for it. It always makes me tear up. And Simon Cowell is a very interesting person because he's a very strange combination of extremely sentimental and extremely judgmental. And so you can really see, and it seems to me that his judgmental capability is actually nested inside his discernment, that he really does care that the people who are making an effort and who are genuinely talented rise to the top. And the price you pay for that, obviously, is that the people who aren't genuinely trying or talented don't get to rise to the top.
And he's also, I would say, got more sentimental and less judgmental since becoming a father, which is interesting. Because I've known Simon for nearly 40 years.
Testosterone decrease.
Yeah, before he had any commitments, he was wham, bam, take everybody down if he didn't think they were any good. Now he's much more empathetic. And I'm sure it's becoming a father that's done that too. I've noticed it tangibly on screen. And it reminds me of Sir Alex Ferguson, who was the greatest sporting coach in history, I would argue, who was the great Manchester United football coach. And he always said that he loved to pick kids like 18, 19-year-olds because they played with utter fearlessness. And he said once they started getting married, having kids, having responsibilities, their risk-taking and fearlessness started to diminish. So the peak time for a lot of footballers, in his estimation, was 18, 19, 20, 21. It makes perfect sense, but interesting to have the greatest coach of all actually outline that this was a real thing that he saw time and again.
It's interesting to me, again, to watch, say, those talent shows and see that capacity for discernment is also very tightly associated with, it's something like the desire to mentor, right? And there's something about that that's very masculine, because the masculine element of developmental facilitation is something like mentoring. It's something like encouragement. And you can really see that in Cowell. And, well, everybody who works on those talent shows is actually quite good at that. But he seems to be genuinely interested in facilitating the development of the career of the people who are, in fact, talented and trying, and goes out of his way to do that. And I think it's part of the appeal of the show, to watch him exercise that careful judgment that's also on the side of the person who's striving upward. Yeah, it's a lovely thing.
He used to say to me when I didn't replace him, he couldn't be on America's Got Talent because he was on American Idol. So even though he created America's Got Talent, he wasn't able to be a judge. And he said to me, look, here's the deal. I remember I was in dreamland. I'd been fired from my job as a newspaper editor thinking that's the end of my media career. And literally a few months later, I'm on the Paramount movie lot in Los Angeles in my trailer next to David Hasselhoff's trailer and Regis Philbin's trailer. I'm thinking, I could get very used to this. And then Cowell roared up in his Ferrari, whatever he had at the time. And he came and had a cup of tea with me, all very British, in my trailer. And he said, here's the deal. You can be as judgmental as you want. And you can be as brash as you like. And you can be everything that I know you to be when you want to be that tabloid editor kind of mindset. But you have to be right 80% of the time or more. Otherwise, the act doesn't play with the audience at home. If they're looking at you being mean, but you're wrong, and they don't agree with you, the act doesn't fly. And that was very good advice because it concentrates your mind to think, not just what are you thinking of something, but actually what are the audience at home likely to be thinking here? And that particularly comes down to the empathy that you would want to show certain acts. A good example would be Susan Boyle, who became probably the greatest breakout
that was really
star of any talent show anywhere. I mean, there was a 47-year-old spinster from a Scottish village who never performed outside of her little community, who suddenly became the biggest superstar in music in the world, sold 27 million albums. And when the finale of the show took place live, there were news crews from NBC, ABC, CBS. It was insane.
It was amazing.
Insane. And we all, having initially been very judgmental in a way. If you look at the original clip, rolling our eyes.
Yeah, who's this?
Who's this? This is going to be terrible.
Yeah.
The evolution very quickly of, wow, we've got something special here. And then our desire collectively to then be very protective to Susan, because she'd had a tough upbringing. She'd been starved of oxygen when she was born, and that made her a little socially awkward with a lot of people. And we were determined that she would get protected. And Simon was particularly determined. It was his show. This was one of his breakout stars. And that's all part of it. And I think that is a side of him that people don't often see, but I saw it, his desire to protect Susan and people like her who were just so unused to the limelight. But she was extraordinary. I remember going to the Rockefeller Center in New York. It was snowing, literally like 2 feet of snow. And they had an outdoor stage. And she was going to sing I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables, the one that she sang on the show, live at 8 a.m. And she was vomiting in her dressing room 10 minutes before from fear, utterly terror-struck. And at 8 o'clock sharp, she was on that stage, now age 48, in the center of New York on NBC's Today Show. And she absolutely sang it completely faultlessly in front of a big crowd outside.
Amazing.
And I remember looking at that going, that's extraordinary.
That's for sure.
So she had
You never know what's inside people.
And she had something magical. And the beauty of those talent shows is, I always believe everyone's got something. Everyone has a talent. I genuinely believe that. And, I remember going to the Soweto Township, for example, in South Africa once, and the kids singing and dancing and seeing some of them and thinking, you would literally win America's Got Talent if you sang like that on a stage. And these are penniless kids in a township in Soweto. So I think everybody has a talent. You just have to find a way to unlock it.
Security is top of mind for many Americans during these crazy times. Security for our country, security for our leaders, and security for our families. But you're not financially secure if all your eggs are in one basket. Gold and silver are an excellent way to diversify your savings. They're a hedge against inflation, a physical asset that is in high demand globally. Through my friends at Birch Gold Group, you can own physical gold and silver in a tax-sheltered retirement account. That's right, you can diversify an old IRA or 401k for no money out of pocket into an IRA in gold and silver. This is just one thing you can do today to secure your family's savings. Text Jordan to 989898 and receive a free, no-obligation info kit to learn the role that precious metals play in your overall savings strategy. Again, text Jordan to 989898. With an A+ rating with a Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers, you can trust Birch Gold to help diversify your savings and secure your family's financial future. Text Jordan to 989898 today.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's very interesting about that show, maybe why it's received such incredibly widespread public attention, is because it is strictly meritocratic.
Yes.
Right. And there's such a ideological assault on the idea of meritocracy. I was just watching a congressman from the U.S. today claiming that the critics of Biden after the last debate are ableist.
Yeah,
right? I mean, well, I don't even know what to think about that. It's like, I see. So now here's your theory. Your theory is that it doesn't matter whether the president of the United States is able, because all discrimination between being able and unable is a form of prejudice. And that even applies with regards to the president of the United States. And so that means that all the people who are concerned that there might be something astray with him cognitively, that we're being lied to about at a level that's almost inconceivable, are now equivalent to like KKK racists from the 1940s. And that's your argument.
And by the way, in relation to the same critique of his vice president, should you dare to criticize Kamala Harris, you are de facto a racist. That the only reason,
Gavin Newsom said that the other day.
The only reason that you would feel the need to criticize this black woman who's vice president is not that she's been completely incompetent in her job, which any impartial observer would conclude, but it has to be because of her skin color and her gender. And
even though that's why she was put in the damn position to begin with.
Joe Biden said publicly, I want a black woman, right? And then he gets a black woman who is massively underperformed, which hasn't helped him at all. But no one's allowed to criticize her, because if you do, you'll be called a racist. And I find that one of the laziest tropes out there in modern society. It's a way of, I think we've discussed it before, but it's a way of stifling honest debate. It's a way of censoring legitimate criticism.
It's a way of asserting moral superiority that's unearned.
Yeah,
That's a lovely
and actually, none of them really mean it. I mean, it is the genuine epitome of virtue signaling. What they're really, I mean, I remember for example, I remember when the George Floyd murder happened, and it was a horrific incident, of course. But I remember that soon after that, there was a Black Square Day announced on Instagram, where everybody had to signal their virtue about this by doing a Black Square. Now, I'd spent the entire morning on Good Morning Britain hosting debates about the George Floyd killing and showing enormous empathy and support for Black Lives Matter and what had happened. This is very early stages, before a lot of stuff came out about the organization Black Lives Matter, which put a rather different gloss on them. But the principle that, this had been a terrible killing, that this man should never have been killed, that it was possibly racially motivated, all that kind of stuff. I was debating this with an absolutely open mind and being very empathetic to all these arguments. But I didn't do my Black Square on Instagram. And my sons got in touch with me and said, Dad, you got to do your Black Square. I went, why? We're getting criticized because you haven't done it. And I actually had posted a picture of a bottle of rosé wine because I was having one in my local square. And I hadn't given any thought to the rule that I had to signal my virtue about this thing. And I then got absolutely annihilated by people saying, how dare you do this? Where is your Black Square? And I remember thinking, but all of you are going to go right back tomorrow morning to posting inane, self-aggrandizing photographs of yourselves on beaches or in nightclubs or in Ferraris, whatever. None of this means anything to you. Whereas tomorrow morning, I'll be back on air doing another 3 hours of debate about this to try and get the society in the world in relation to this issue back to a place of better racial justice. Now, which one is going to have a better effect on influencing people's minds?
There you go, be an ableist again.
Right, and that's the point, is that I found it such a trite and kind of pointless example of this cult of virtue signaling.
It's worse than that. So I just finished a book, which is going to be published in November, and I walked through a sequence of biblical stories trying to explain what they meant psychologically. And I spent some time on the book of Exodus for obvious reasons. And there's a commandment in there that people misapprehend. So I think it's the third commandment. Don't use God's name. Thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. And people think that means don't swear or curse. And it sort of means that. There's a peripheral meaning that is associated with that casual use of the sacred, let's say. But that isn't what it means. It means don't claim divine virtue when you're working for your own purposes. And the same thing happens in the gospel account, say, because the Pharisees, who are Christ's primary enemy, are the people he accuses of utilizing the sacred, the deepest, so you could say compassion even, given its proper place, for their own self-aggrandizement. They're praying in public. They're trying to occupy the best seats in the marketplace. They want the best seats in the synagogues, etc. That's the accusation. And so that virtue signaling, it's not merely, it's an expression of an unbelievably deep and ignorant narcissism, right? It's part of the victim-victimizer narrative, first of all, which explains all of history with no cognitive effort. And then it's these performative gestures that make you morally virtuous, right? And one of the consequences of that too is as soon as you're morally virtuous like that, you get to specify the victimizer who's your enemy and tear them into shreds, and that's actually a moral act. And I mean, you saw a bit of that, you said, with the Black Square. But it's an unbelievably pathological...
But it was fascinating to me that my own children, all in their 20s at the time, that they were being contacted by friends saying, why has your dad done this picture of a bottle of wine? Where's his Black Square? And they were kind of damned by association. And were keen for me to rectify this problem. And I had to say,
but there's a tribal signaling there too.
And I said, guys, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to feel bullied into doing something that I think actually is pointless and trite, and that all the people doing it don't really care much about this cause and will be very quickly back to their normal work on Instagram, which is pumping themselves up and showing off and all the things people do on Instagram. I said, I'm just not going to play this game.
Well, there's no cost to doing it, right? To putting up a Black Square.
Right.
You can indicate
there's
someone's
no
commitment. That's exactly right.
There's no sacrifice. There's no hard work.
Why did you
required.
use sacrifice? Is that?
Well, because I think that to really support a cause, whatever that cause may be, at some point you have to show a bit of sacrifice to that cause. You have to commit time or money or resources or whatever it may be to support reputation, put your head over the parapet. There has to be an element of risk and an element of sacrifice. Now, if all you're doing is following the hashtag trend of the day, there's no sacrifice, there's no risk-taking. In fact, it's the opposite.
The reverse.
It's actually more courageous to say, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. And it's a far more tangible and effective way of trying to get racial injustice to a better place. which everybody should share that desire. And I just feel that it comes back to what you said earlier about the victimhood generation. The one common theme of the people who play that victim card all the time is they almost never show any sacrifice for anything. It's all about themselves. It's all about, how can I get pity? How can I be showered in sympathy? How can I become almost famous for failure and celebrated for it? Rather than the way I was brought up, which is you celebrated success, you drowned your sorrows with failure, and you didn't let it take you down or destroy you, and you dusted yourself down and got back on with it. But the idea of celebrating failure, the idea of celebrating coming last at the school sports day, the idea that everyone had to get a participation prize, even if they were terrible at something. No, I wasn't very good at athletics at school. I was very good at cricket. I was one of the best cricket players age 12 in the country. And my dream was to be a professional cricketer. I never made it. My other dream was to be a journalist. I made that. But I was terrible at athletics. My two brothers were brilliant at athletics. They used to win everything. But I used to always win the non-finalist race. And I was very happy about that, because I said to my...
What is that?
Well, so everyone who didn't win a race got put in the non-finalist race. So you were the kind of lepers with the most fingers, right? For want of a crass phrase. And the point was that you were competing against other losers, but you could still win something. And I thought, I'm going to be the best loser, because I'm crap at this. I can't really run or hurdle or throw javelins or anything like that. But I can beat this lot. And I was proud of that. But I never mistook it for actual glory or winning. And I think people that, I see people on social media say, I'm so proud of myself. I just passed my driving test at the 11th attempt. And I'm like, why would you want anybody to know that? Why would you want anyone to know that you're so completely clueless at driving? It took you 11 attempts to pass your driving test. And what do you want me to do? Do you want me to send you champagne? Do you want to be trending #1 around the world for being the worst driver in the world? What are you celebrating here? If you passed your driving test at the 11th attempt, I'm pleased for you, but I'm not proud of you. This is not something that should instill pride in you. And I think that's where society's so warped now. We celebrate failure.
We also celebrate pride.
And pride.
Like formally.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And we also, we've started to feel bad about winners. We don't really feel comfortable with winners anymore, especially if they're a little bit self-confident. And yet I think they're the best possible role models out there. People that can perform in the cauldron of great sport or entertainment, whatever it may be. I watched all this sort of jealous sniping about Taylor Swift, for example. And then I went to her concert at Wembley. Absolutely mind-blowing experience. It's not because she's the best singer in the world or the best dancer or the best actress or the best pianist or the best guitarist, even though she does all those things. It's just I've never seen an audience so at one with the performer, where she gave them what they wanted. 3.5 hours of banging hits on a massive stage with huge theatrics. Every kid there, including my 12-year-old daughter, had a fantastic time. But the sniping, she doesn't sing every song live. She's this, she's that. She's written all these songs herself. She's grossing $2 billion on this tour. Pro rata, the biggest tour in the history of music. Bigger than the Beatles when they played Shea Stadium. And yet the natural reaction of a lot of people is to snipe, whilst pretending, you can almost bet they all have #BeKind in their ex-bios. In other words, I'm a really kind person. I'm a tolerant person. I'm a nice person. And I'll destroy any of you fascists who deviate from my woke worldview. But when it comes to Taylor Swift, I'm going to bitch all over her. I'm going to trash her. I'm going to be envious and resentful.